Do you have any idea what you just destroyed? The question had not been asked yet, but in less than 60 seconds, it would be the only thing anyone in the precinct could think about. For now, Officer Daniel Whitmore stood behind the front counter beneath the cold fluorescent lights, holding a cream-colored legal folder in both hands as though it were something he had already decided did not matter. Across from him stood Naomi Carter, a 36-year-old black woman in a charcoal coat, her expression controlled even as every instinct told her the situation had crossed a line. "Officer, those are federal legal documents," she said, slowly and clearly. Whitmore glanced at the pages, then back at Naomi. He had barely looked at the first sheet. He had not checked the case number printed near the top. He had not examined the official markings. Most importantly, he had not bothered to ask why Naomi had brought the documents into the building. "You've told me that twice," he replied, his voice carrying across the lobby. A few conversations stopped. A desk phone rang unanswered. Somewhere down the hallway, a radio crackled with a dispatch call. Naomi kept her hands visible on the counter. "And both times, I asked you to read the first page." Whitmore gave a humorless smile. "I don't need you telling me how to do my job." Naomi studied him for a moment. She had encountered arrogance before, but this felt different. He was not examining evidence. He was examining her. Every answer she gave seemed to irritate him more, as though her calmness itself were an act of defiance. 10 feet away, Officer Emily Brooks had stopped typing. Her eyes moved from Whitmore to the folder. She could see enough of the exposed page to notice a federal reference number near the top. Her expression tightened. "Daniel," she said cautiously, "maybe you should actually look at I've got it, Brooks." His response came instantly. Naomi's gaze shifted toward the security camera mounted above the lobby entrance. A tiny red light glowed beneath the lens. "Recording." She looked back at Whitmore. "I'm asking you one last time. Read the first page." The room seemed strangely quiet now. Whitmore looked around, perhaps noticing that people were watching, perhaps deciding that backing down would make him appear weak. Then he looked directly at Naomi. "You walked into my station waving papers around like they give you authority." Naomi's voice remained level. "They don't give me authority. They establish a legal fact. There's a difference." Something changed in Whitmore's face. He gripped the folder. Emily took one step forward. "Daniel." Too late. The sound was surprisingly small. Paper tearing. Once. Then again. White sheets separated in his hands and drifted toward the polished floor. Nobody spoke. Naomi didn't reach for them. She didn't raise her voice. She simply watched one torn page slide several feet across the tile and stop beside a pair of polished black shoes that had just crossed through the precinct entrance. The man wearing them stopped. He looked down. Slowly, he bent and picked up the torn page. His eyes moved across the federal heading, the case number, and what remained of an official signature. Then he looked toward Naomi. "Ms. Carter?" Naomi finally turned. "Mr. Reed." Whitmore frowned, still holding the torn pieces. The stranger straightened, his expression becoming very still. And for the first time that morning, Naomi saw uncertainty enter Daniel Whitmore's eyes. 47 minutes earlier, Naomi Carter had stepped out of a small federal office building in downtown Richmond, carrying the same cream-colored folder against her side, unaware that before the hour was over, those pages would become the center of a confrontation no one inside the precinct could easily explain away. The morning air was cool, and traffic rolled steadily along the avenue as office workers crossed between coffee shops, parking garages, and government buildings. Naomi paused beneath the stone awning and checked the address on her phone one final time. The police precinct was less than 2 miles away. The instructions she had received were simple. Bring the originals. Keep them together. Deliver them personally. A few seconds later, her phone rang. Naomi answered as she started toward her car. "Carter speaking." A calm voice came through the line. "Are you on your way?" Naomi recognized the assistant from the federal office. "I am leaving now." "Good. Bring the originals directly to the front desk. Mr. Reed will meet you there." Naomi glanced down at the folder. "Understood." "And Naomi, do not leave them with anyone unless the transfer is properly acknowledged." The warning made her slow for half a step. "Is there a problem?" There was a brief silence. "There should not be." The call ended. leaving Naomi with a sentence that sounded ordinary, but somehow did not feel ordinary at all. She placed the folder carefully on the passenger seat and drove toward the precinct. She had spent years working around legal documents as a civil rights case coordinator, enough to understand that paper could look unimpressive while carrying enormous consequences. These particular pages concerned a matter she had been helping document for months. Names, dates, statements, official correspondence. Nothing about the folder looked dramatic from the outside, and that was exactly why she treated it carefully. Truth rarely announced itself with flashing lights. Sometimes it arrived inside a plain envelope and waited for someone to read it. When Naomi entered the precinct, the atmosphere felt routine. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Phones rang behind the counter. Officers moved through the hallway carrying coffee and paperwork. She approached the front desk and waited until Officer Daniel Whitmore looked up. His eyes moved first to her face, then to the folder, then back to her face. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yes. I am here to deliver legal documents for Mr. Jonathan Reed." Whitmore leaned back slightly. "Jonathan Reed? That is correct. And you are Naomi Carter." She placed her identification on the counter, but kept one hand lightly on the folder. Whitmore examined the identification longer than necessary. "What exactly is in there?" "Documents Mr. Reed is expecting." Whitmore held out his hand. "Give them to me." Naomi did not move. "I was instructed to deliver them through the proper transfer process." His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "This is the proper process." Naomi looked around the lobby, then back at him. "Then there should be no problem acknowledging receipt." For several seconds, neither spoke. 10 feet away, Officer Emily Brooks glanced up from her computer. Whitmore's jaw tightened. "You people come in here thinking a few legal words mean you can tell officers how things work." Naomi heard the phrase. So did Emily. Naomi could have answered with anger. Instead, she took a slow breath and opened the folder just enough to expose the first page. "Officer Whitmore," she said quietly, "before we go any further, please read this." Whitmore looked at the exposed page for barely a second before lifting his eyes back to Naomi. That was the moment the morning could still have gone differently. All he had to do was read. The first page carried an official federal heading, a reference number, and language clear enough to explain why Naomi Carter had walked into the precinct carrying original documents instead of sending copies through ordinary mail. But Whitmore seemed more interested in the woman standing before him than in the words sitting inches from his hand. "I asked you what is in the folder," he said. Naomi kept her voice measured. "And I told you. Mr. Reed is expecting these documents." The first page explains the transfer. Whitmore extended his hand again. "Give me the folder." Naomi hesitated, not because she wanted a confrontation, but because the instructions from the federal office were still fresh in her mind. "Do not leave them with anyone unless the transfer is properly acknowledged." "I can hand it over as soon as you confirm receipt," she said. "Or you can contact Mr. Reed." Whitmore gave a short laugh. "You do not walk into a police station and start setting conditions." "I am not setting conditions. I am following instructions." 10 feet away, Emily Brooks had stopped pretending not to listen. She had worked beside Whitmore long enough to recognize the change in his voice. It was subtle at first, a harder edge, the kind that appeared whenever someone questioned him. Emily turned slightly in her chair and saw the top of Naomi's document. She could not read every line from that distance, but she could see enough to know it deserved more than a passing glance. "Daniel," Emily said, "why not call the contact number?" Whitmore did not turn around. "I said I have it." Naomi looked toward Emily for only a moment, then back at Whitmore. "There is a telephone number on the first page." Whitmore closed the folder with his palm. "I'm not calling somebody because you tell me to." "Then read it." Silence settled between them. A man waiting near the entrance lowered his coffee cup. A woman sitting beneath the wall clock stopped scrolling through her phone. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but they could feel the temperature of the room changing. Whitmore leaned forward. "Let me explain something to you. I've been doing this job for 18 years. I know when somebody walks in here trying to make themselves sound more important than they are." Naomi felt the words land, but her expression did not change. Imagine being told that your calm explanation is suspicious, that following instructions is arrogance, that asking someone to read a document is somehow challenging their authority. Naomi had learned long ago that anger could become a distraction when someone had already decided what they wanted to see. So she refused to give Whitmore one. "This is not about whether I am important," she said. "It is about whether those documents are." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "And I suppose I am just supposed to take your word for it." Naomi slowly opened the folder again and turned the first page toward him. "No," she said. "That is why I keep asking you to read." Emily rose from her chair. She could now see the federal reference number clearly. Daniel Whitmore. Whitmore reached for the folder before she could finish. Naomi released it rather than create a struggle. He held the documents in one hand and looked at her with the satisfaction of someone who believed he had finally established control. Naomi watched him carefully. "Please read the first page." Whitmore glanced down, but his eyes never traveled beyond the opening lines. Then he folded the cover shut. "We are done doing this your way." Naomi's gaze drifted past his shoulder toward the security camera above the lobby entrance. Beneath the dark lens, a tiny red light was glowing. Naomi kept her eyes on the tiny red light above the lobby entrance, and something about her sudden stillness made Emily Brooks uneasy. Whitmore still held the cream-colored folder, convinced the exchange had finally shifted in his favor. "Is that camera recording?" Naomi asked. Whitmore followed her gaze and gave a dismissive shrug. "Every second." Naomi looked back at him. "Good." One word. Calm. Almost quiet. Yet it changed the atmosphere more effectively than shouting ever could. Emily noticed it immediately. Whitmore did too, although he seemed unwilling to admit it. "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked. "Exactly what I said." Naomi rested her hands lightly against the edge of the counter. "There is now a record of me identifying those documents, asking you to verify them, and giving you a contact person who can confirm why I am here." Whitmore's expression tightened. "Do not start lecturing me about records." "I'm not lecturing you." "Then stop acting like you are running this station." Several people in the lobby turned toward them. The woman beneath the wall clock lowered her phone. The man holding the coffee cup shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. Naomi could feel their attention, that peculiar weight of becoming the center of a room when all you wanted was to complete an ordinary task and leave. She had felt versions of it before. The extra questions, the doubtful stare, the assumption that confidence must mean confrontation. But she had also learned something important over the years. Dignity did not require permission. "I came here to deliver documents," Naomi said. "Nothing more." Whitmore tapped the folder against the counter. "And I told you I will decide what happens with them." Emily stepped closer. "Daniel, there's clearly a federal reference number on that page. We should verify it." He finally turned toward her. "Brooks, go back to your desk." Emily did not move. "It will take 30 seconds to make a telephone call." Whitmore's face hardened. "I said I have this handled." The silence afterward felt heavier than before. Naomi watched Emily's expression change from concern to something closer to disappointment. There was the invisible choice people faced when authority stopped behaving like responsibility. "Speak or look away." Emily had not chosen yet. Whitmore turned back to Naomi. "Now tell me what these papers actually contain." "You already have the answer in your hand. I want you to tell me." Naomi paused. "Some of that information is not mine to discuss in a public lobby." Whitmore smiled, as though he had caught her contradicting herself. "Convenient." "No. Appropriate. You expect me to believe you walked in carrying sensitive federal paperwork, and somehow I am the problem for asking questions?" Naomi's voice remained even. "Questions are not the problem. Refusing to accept the answers is." The words landed harder than she intended, and Whitmore's expression changed. He opened the folder again, but instead of reading, he held the first page toward her. "You think this makes you untouchable?" Naomi stared at him. "I never said anything like that." "You did not have to." Emily moved another step closer. "Daniel, just put the folder down." Whitmore ignored her. Naomi could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights and the distant ringing of a telephone behind the counter. Everything seemed strangely amplified now. She looked at the folder, then at Whitmore. Officer Whitmore, this is the third and final time I'm going to say this. Read the first page. For a second, his eyes dropped toward the federal heading. He could have stopped. He could have checked the number. He could have made one call. Instead, pride made the decision for him. His fingers tightened around the pages. Emily saw it first. Daniel, do not. Naomi did not move. Whitmore looked directly at her, then at the documents in his hands. And the room went completely silent. For several seconds, nothing happened. Whitmore stood beneath the fluorescent lights with the documents held between his hands, while Naomi watched him with the quiet certainty of someone who knew the next decision belonged entirely to him. Emily Brooks remained only a few feet away. Daniel, she said again, softer this time, put the folder on the counter. Whitmore glanced toward the people watching from the lobby, and Naomi saw the calculation in his eyes. This was no longer about verifying paperwork. Somewhere along the way, he had turned a routine delivery into a contest over who would control the room, and now too many people were watching for him to simply admit he had been wrong. Federal documents, he muttered. Everybody comes in here with some story. Naomi's expression changed slightly. This is not a story. Whitmore looked at her. Then prove it. Naomi nodded toward the page in his hand. I already gave you the proof. Emily drew a slow breath. The contact number is right there. Whitmore ignored her. Then came a sound. Small, dry, unmistakable. Paper tearing through the silence. Emily froze. The man near the entrance lowered his coffee cup. Naomi did not move. Whitmore separated the pages again, reducing the orderly folder into loose pieces that slipped from his hands and scattered across the polished tile. There was no shouting. No silencios. Somehow, the absence of noise made the moment feel larger. Naomi looked down as a fragment carrying part of the federal heading landed near the counter. Another piece drifted several feet toward the entrance. Whitmore placed what remained of the folder on a desk. Now, he said, maybe we can have a normal conversation. Naomi slowly raised her eyes. There was hurt there, but it did not control her voice. You were given 3 opportunities to read them. Whitmore started to answer, but Emily interrupted. Daniel, what did you just do? He turned toward her. They are papers, Brooks. Emily stared at him. You do not know that. Neither does she. Naomi looked toward the camera. The red light continued glowing. Yes, she said quietly. Edo. Whitmore gave an impatient sigh. Here we go again. Naomi did not respond. Instead, she looked down at the pieces scattered across the floor, and something unexpected happened. She stopped trying to convince him. Imagine standing in a room where someone has already decided that your explanation carries less weight than their assumption. There comes a point when repeating the truth no longer serves the person refusing to hear it. Naomi had reached that point. Emily bent down and picked up the fragment nearest her shoe. Her eyes moved across the printed lines. She saw a case reference, an official seal, then a partial signature block. The color drained from her expression. Daniel. This time her voice sounded different. Whitmore noticed. What? Emily looked toward Naomi, then back at the paper. I think you need to call Captain Hayes. Whitmore laughed once. For this. Now. Before he could answer, the front doors opened behind them. Cool morning air swept briefly into the lobby. Footsteps crossed the tile. One of the torn pages had traveled almost 6 feet from the counter and stopped beside a pair of polished black shoes. The newcomer paused. He bent down, lifted the page carefully, and read what remained of the heading. His expression became still. Naomi turned to the sound of his voice. Ms. Carter? She recognized him immediately. Mr. Reed. Whitmore looked between them, irritation replacing confidence for the first time. And who exactly are you? The man straightened, holding the torn federal page between 2 fingers. He reached inside his coat and removed his credentials. Jonathan Reed, he said, United States Attorney. Nobody in the lobby moved. Reed looked at the paper in his hand, then at the pieces covering the floor. When his eyes finally settled on Whitmore, his voice was almost unnervingly calm. Who destroyed these documents? The question remained suspended in the lobby. Nobody rushed to answer it. Jonathan Reed stood near the entrance with the torn page in his hand, his credentials still visible. while Daniel Whitmore seemed to search for an explanation that had not existed 30 seconds earlier. "I did," Whitmore finally said. His voice had lost some of its certainty. "There was a situation." Reed looked around the lobby. Pieces of the documents rested across the tile between him and the front counter. What kind of situation required destroying these? Whitmore straightened. She came in refusing to cooperate. Naomi said nothing. Reed turned toward her, then toward Emily Brooks. "Officer, were you present?" Emily hesitated. Whitmore immediately stepped into the silence. Brooks was working at her desk. She did not hear everything. Emily looked at him. Something in her expression changed. "I heard enough." Whitmore's jaw tightened. Reed remained calm. "Then tell me what happened." Emily glanced at Naomi. "Ms. Carter said she was delivering documents for you. She asked Officer Whitmore to read the first page." Reed looked at Whitmore. "Did you?" "I looked at it. That was not my question." The room became quiet again. Whitmore shifted his weight. "Not all of it." Reed lowered his eyes to the fragment in his hand. "Was there a contact number?" Emily answered before Whitmore could. "Yes." "Did Ms. Carter point that out?" "Yes." "Did anyone call it?" Emily shook her head. "No." Whitmore exhaled sharply. "This is being taken completely out of context." She walked in here acting like normal procedures did not apply to her. Naomi finally spoke. "I asked for a receipt acknowledging transfer." Reed turned toward her. "As you were instructed to do." Whitmore looked from Reed to Naomi. "You knew she was coming?" "Yes." That single word seemed to remove the last comfortable explanation available to him. Reed walked toward the counter and placed the torn page carefully on its surface. Ms. Carter was carrying original materials connected to an active federal civil rights review. She was not asking for special treatment. She was following documented transfer instructions. Whitmore stared at the page. For the first time, he seemed interested in reading it. "Nobody told me that." Emily's voice came quietly from beside him. "She did." Whitmore turned. Emily held his gaze. 3 times. The words landed without drama, which somehow made them harder to dismiss. Reed looked toward the security camera above the entrance. "Is that system recording?" Emily nodded. "Audio and video in the public lobby." Reed's expression remained controlled. "Preserve everything from this morning. No deletions. No everything." Whitmore's face tightened. "You cannot come into my precinct and start issuing orders based on one misunderstanding." "I am not interested in controlling your precinct," Reed replied. "I'm interested in preserving a record." At that moment, footsteps sounded from the hallway. Captain Robert Hayes appeared, adjusting his glasses as he approached the lobby. "What is going on out here?" His eyes moved from Reed's credentials to Naomi, then to the papers scattered across the floor. Emily spoke first. "Captain, we have a problem." Hayes looked at Whitmore. "Daniel." Whitmore opened his mouth, but Reed lifted the torn page from the counter and handed it to the captain. Before anyone explains anything, Reed said, "I would like you to do one thing Officer Whitmore was asked to do 3 times." Hayes accepted the page. Reed's eyes remained on him. "Read the first page." Captain Robert Hayes lowered his eyes to the torn page, and the entire lobby seemed to wait with him. At first, his expression showed only concentration. Then he reached the second surviving line. His shoulders stiffened. He read further, carefully matching the federal reference number with the remaining language near the bottom. When he finally looked up, the irritation he had carried into the lobby was gone. "Where's the rest of this document?" he asked. Nobody answered immediately. Hayes looked at the pieces scattered across the floor, then at Whitmore. "Tell me those are not the rest of these pages." Whitmore swallowed. "Captain, I can explain." Hayes did not raise his voice. "I asked where the rest of the document is." Emily answered quietly. "On the floor, sir." Hayes closed his eyes for a brief second. Jonathan Reed stood beside Naomi, allowing the silence to do what anger could not. Hayes looked down again and read the surviving text aloud enough to confirm what he was seeing. The materials had been designated for documented transfer in connection with an active federal civil rights review. Naomi Carter was listed as the authorized courier. Jonathan Reed was listed as the receiving official. The telephone number Whitmore had refused to call appeared directly beneath his name. Hayes looked at Naomi. "Ms. Carter, Did you identify yourself when you arrived? Yes. Did you explain why you were here? Yes. Did you tell Officer Whitmore these were federal documents? Naomi held his gaze. 3 times. Hayes turned toward Emily. Is that accurate? This was the moment Whitmore had been watching for. Emily knew it. Naomi knew it. Even Reed seemed to understand that the next few seconds mattered beyond the paperwork. Emily had spent years learning that officers depended on one another. Trust mattered. Loyalty mattered. But loyalty without truth could become something else entirely. She took a slow breath. Yes, Captain. It is accurate. Whitmore stared at her. Emily. She did not look away. She asked you to read the first page 3 times. She gave you Mr. Reed's name. She pointed out the contact number. I suggested that we call it. Whitmore shook his head. You are making it sound like I knew what this was. No, Emily said. I'm saying you had every opportunity to find out. The words left the room silent again. Hayes looked toward the security camera. Preserve the recording immediately. Emily nodded. Yes, sir. Make 2 secured copies and document who handles them. Yes, sir. Whitmore stepped forward. Captain, this was a misunderstanding. Reed finally spoke. A misunderstanding happens when information is unavailable. The information was in his hand. Whitmore looked at Naomi. Why did you not just tell me everything? Naomi's face remained calm, but there was something tired behind her eyes now. Because I told you everything you needed to know. Hay studied Whitmore for a long moment. Daniel, step away from the front desk. Whitmore blinked. Captain, you are relieved from public-facing duty while I review the recording and contact the appropriate offices. Whitmore's confidence disappeared another degree. Over torn paper, Hayes looked down at the federal page in his hand. No, over the decisions that led to it. Naomi finally bent down and picked up one small piece near her shoe. It contained only a few surviving words from the first page. She stared at them for a moment before looking at Whitmore. Her voice was quiet enough that everyone had to listen. All you had to do was read. Whitmore stared at the small piece of paper in Naomi's hand, as if those few surviving words had suddenly become heavier than the entire folder had been minutes earlier. Around him, the precinct continued to function, but the front lobby felt separated from everything else. Phone is hung. A radio murmured somewhere beyond the hallway. No one near the counter moved. Captain Hayes turned to Emily Brooks. Secure the recording first. Emily nodded and returned to her workstation. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she accessed the lobby camera system. Whitmore watched her. Captain, before this goes any further, I would like the chance to explain what happened. Hayes faced him. You will have that chance, after the evidence is preserved. Jonathan Reed gave a slight nod. It was not triumph. It was recognition that procedure, the very thing Whitmore had claimed to defend, was finally being allowed to work. Emily located the footage. Recording begins before Ms. Carter entered the building and continues through the entire interaction. Hayes stepped beside her. Audio. Clear. Make the copies. Whitmore looked toward Naomi. You could have avoided all of this. Naomi's expression remained composed. How? By cooperating. Reed's eyes shifted toward him, but Naomi answered first. I gave you my identification. I gave you the name of the person expecting me. I showed you the contact number. I explained the transfer procedure. I asked you to read the document. She paused. What part of that was not cooperation? Whitmore opened his mouth, then stopped. For the first time, there was no immediate answer. Hayes looked at him with something deeper than frustration. Daniel, surrender your department identification and access card until this review is completed. Whitmore went still. You are suspending me? I am removing you from duty pending an administrative review. What happens after that depends on the evidence. Whitmore glanced around the lobby, perhaps searching for someone who would tell him this had become too much. Instead, he found the same people who had watched Naomi being questioned, now watching him face questions of his own. Emily finished the first secured copy and entered the time into the evidence log. Captain, there is something else. She replayed a short portion of the recording. Whitmore's own voice filled the workstation speakers. Then Naomi's. Calm. Clear. The first request to read the page. A few seconds later came the second. Then Emily's suggestion to call the listed number. Hayes listened without interruption. Reed did the same. When the third request played, Whitmore looked toward the floor. No interpretation was necessary. The sequence spoke for itself. Reed turned to Naomi. Did he ever actually read the document? No. Reed looked at the torn pages scattered nearby. Then this was never really about what those papers said. Naomi understood immediately. So did Emily. Whitmore slowly raised his head. Reed continued, his voice measured. The information was available. Verification was available. A witness was available. The camera was recording. Yet none of that mattered because a conclusion had already been reached before the facts were considered. Hayes said nothing, but the disappointment in his face deepened. Naomi looked down at the fragment she still held. She had entered the building hoping to complete a simple legal transfer. Instead, she had been forced to prove that her words deserved the same consideration Whitmore might have given someone else without hesitation. Hayes extended his hand toward the remaining pieces. We will preserve every fragment. Naomi placed hers carefully on the counter. Good. Whitmore quietly handed over his department identification and access card. The small plastic card made almost no sound when Hayes placed it beside the torn page. Two symbols now rested inches apart on the counter: authority and evidence. Only one of them could explain what had happened. By late afternoon, the cream-colored folder no longer looked like a folder at all. Every surviving piece had been photographed, cataloged, and placed into evidence sleeves, while the original camera recording had been preserved exactly as Captain Robert Hayes ordered. What had begun as an ordinary morning inside the precinct had become an official review involving department leadership and the United States Attorney's Office. Yet Naomi Carter remained remarkably quiet through most of it. She sat near the lobby window while Jonathan Reed completed the necessary transfer documentation using certified copies that his office had retained. Outside, Richmond traffic moved beneath the fading afternoon light as if nothing unusual had happened. Reed eventually approached her. Naomi. She looked up. The originals can be reconstructed for the record, and our certified copies preserve the substance of the material. This will not stop the review. Naomi nodded slowly. I was never worried about the case disappearing. Reed understood what she meant. The documents could be copied. The moment could not. Across the lobby, Emily Brooks finished her written statement and handed it to Captain Hayes. She had included everything, even the moments when she had hesitated to intervene. Hayes read the first page before looking at her. You understand this may make things uncomfortable around here. Emily nodded. Yes, sir. And you still want the statement entered exactly as written? Emily glanced toward Naomi. Especially as written. Hayes accepted it without another word. Whitmore stood farther down the hallway with none of the confidence he had carried that morning. His department identification and access card remained secured with Hayes while the administrative process moved forward. No dramatic punishment arrived in a single instant. Real accountability rarely worked that way. There would be interviews, footage reviews, written findings, and decisions made under procedures that applied whether Whitmore liked them or not. For once, he would have to wait while other people examined the facts. Naomi rose to leave. As she passed the counter, Whitmore looked toward her. Ms. Carter. She stopped. He seemed to search for words. I should have handled that differently. Naomi studied him. It was not the apology she deserved, but perhaps it was the first honest sentence he had spoken to her all day. You should have seen me differently, she replied. Whitmore lowered his eyes. Naomi continued toward the entrance. Reed walked beside her, but before they reached the doors, Captain Hayes called her name. Miss Carter, I owe you an apology on behalf of this precinct. Naomi turned. Thank you, Captain, but make sure the next person does not. Need a United States attorney to walk through that door before somebody listens. Hayes stood silently for a moment. Then he nodded. I will. Emily watched Naomi leave, carrying no folder now, only her purse and the quiet dignity she had refused to surrender. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the sidewalk. Reed opened the door, and cool air moved through the lobby. Naomi stepped into the light without looking back. Whitmore had believed authority meant controlling the conversation. deciding whose explanation mattered, and treating doubt like proof. But authority and justice had never been the same thing. A badge could open doors. A uniform could command attention. Neither could turn an assumption into truth. That morning, Whitmore had torn apart documents because he believed the person carrying them did not deserve to be believed. By evening, every torn piece had become evidence of the very thing he refused to see. He thought he was destroying proof. In the end, the pieces proved everything.